Hi, this is Heather from Especially Paper. Today we're going to make a paper anemone. This paper flower template is available at especiallypaper.com. It's an SVG file or DXF file made for cutting machines. So Cricut and Silhouette are the programs that it has been tested in. And I've already cut all the pieces on my Cricut maker machine. I cut the petals and the center, the stamens from text weight paper from Astra Bright. And I cut the leaves from green cardstock. So the first step is to create the quilled center. You'll need 5 of the center strips. So these are really narrow strips cut from black text weight paper. And paper quilling is an art technique of using rolled strips of paper to create artwork. So in this case, I've designed a custom quilling strip. So normally quilling strips are straight on both sides. So included in the template is a very narrow strip that has a very tiny zigzag on one side of it. And you need to glue 5 of these strips together to create one really long quilling strip. Just overlap the strips by about 2 zigs. Now that you've prepared the one long quilling strip, let's roll that. If you don't have a quilling tool, you can get the roll started by wrapping it around a thin floral wire. And then just finish the roll by hand by rolling it between your fingers. But if you have quilling tools, it does make this easier. You can use just the tool with the slotted end, or if you have it, you can also use what's called a curling coach. So this was not something that I'd purchased separately. It happened to come in a set of quilling tools that I purchased, and I do find it pretty handy. I'm not the neatest paper quiller, so this helps me keep the roll even. So slide the strip into the end of the quilling tool and wrap it gently to get it started, and then you can move a little bit faster to roll your strip. I'm holding the strip against the curling coach to help keep it even. Once you've nearly reached the end, pull the roll off of the quilling tool and add a little glue to the end to adhere it. I like to push mine against the table to help make sure my roll is really flat before I start to shape it. See all those little ridges from the zigzag? That's a part of what makes this particular center really special and more realistic, is because that adds texture to the finished piece. The next step is shaping that rolled piece over a mold. So I'm using a quilling mold. Other things that work really well for this are things like a measuring spoon that's round, a small ball can also work. So think about something like the size of a marble. And you can use that to form a half sphere. Then use your fingers to gently pull the roll down and shape it into a thimble shape. Make sure you don't pull too far. If you do, it will unravel the roll. As you go, try to keep the layers even. Once you've created a shape that you like, add glue to the inside of the thimble. Use a scrap of paper to spread the glue thinly over the entire inside of the piece. I got just a little bit more glue than I really wanted on the inside of this one, so I'm just going to scrape a little bit of it out. But even if it's a little thick, it doesn't really matter. It will dry. It will just take a little bit longer. So set that aside to dry. So next up, let's prep the floral wires. I've already cut mine down to about 10 or 11 inches. It's also a good time to start heating up your glue gun. So we need to create a loop on the end of the wire. Place it around the wider end of your pliers. When you first create the loop, it's going to be off to one side. So just use your pliers to even it out and make sure the loop is straight on the end of the wire. Fill the center 1/3 to 1/2 with hot glue. Normally I would wait until that layer of craft glue is dry, but not a big deal. I like to twist the loop into that glue to make sure it's really in the center of it. It really has glue all around it. Before it dries, make sure that the center is even on the end. So you want to look at it from all angles and make any adjustments before it dries. Then just set it aside to dry. So next up, we need to create the stamens. You'll need 4 pieces of the stamens cut. I cut mine from text weight paper. You could use cardstock as well. You do need to use a clean, fresh mat. It doesn't need to be absolutely new, but it needs to be a mat that's in good shape to get nice, clean cuts on really detailed pieces like this. As you're pulling them off, be gentle. They are kind of fragile. Those little arms are very thin. If you lose a few arms, don't worry about it. Many of the flowers you saw in the photos use layers that had an arm or two missing. They will blend right in by the time we finish. So this step is totally optional, but I am adding just a touch of white to the ends of the stamens. I also had a version of flower where I actually colored the entire stamen tip white. I personally thought that was too much, so I went back and did just a couple of dots on the edge of each stamen. So if you look at some photos of anemones, particularly this variety, so this color of them, you'll see that there is some white pollen attached to the stamens. I'm using a Uniball white gel pen. You could also use white paint. Acrylic would work just fine. Paint markers, if you have those, that's another option. So anything that's going to have the opacity to sit on top of dark paper could be used for this step. And again, it's a step you could skip altogether if you just want to take a little less time for the project or don't have a particular white medium that you think would be a good fit for this. So I'm prepping 4, and you can see I'm using one of those stamens that has a missing arm. And when I'm using gel pens, I do like to make sure to clean off the tip. They do have a tendency to get clogged, so making sure that they're clean before I put it away will help make sure the pen stays in good shape for longer. I've also had some good luck for gel pens that are not writing well with rubbing those across a little piece of paper towel that's got some rubbing alcohol in it. So that's a trick you can try if you've got a gel pen that's a little bit on the dry side. Layer 4 pieces of the stamens together. So try to keep the glue light. This was a little more glue than I intended. And as you layer it, position it so that the center hole lines up and that the arms are alternating. Almost there. We just need one more to create our 4 layers. Use a bone folder or closed scissor blades as an option as well to curl the stamens upwards. So this is kind of like curling gift ribbon. So if you remember the days where we used to pull all the ribbon to make those curls, same technique. So you just want to apply some pressure between the tool and your finger and it will curl the paper. Slide the stamens onto the center that you have prepared. line the edge of the center with a thin line of glue. I'm sorry, I did not have my hand in a good position here, so it's hard to see, but just try to keep the glue light. And then slide the stamens up so that they're snug against the center. And set that aside to dry completely. So once it's dry, you can fluff the stamens. So kind of play with it. I'm using my finger to, for one, kind of pull them up around the center. So I'm kind of bending that stamen at the base. And then secondly, separate the pieces of fringe. So just kind of pull them out, fluff them up. You can also use a tool of some sort with a small end if you want to separate them a little bit. So just keep playing with it until you're happy with it. The center is, I think, my favorite part of this flower. I like the texture that the center has. I love the stamens. That's very indicative of those anemone. That's a very distinctive feature that they have. All right, I'm going to set this aside until we're ready to assemble all the pieces. Okay, next up, we're going to add some color to the leaves. So just as many of the other steps, adding color is optional. You could just use the solid colored cardstock if that's what you prefer to do. I do like to add color to colored cardstock. That's something that I do quite a lot with my paper flowers. And my 3 favorite mediums are alcohol markers, like I'm using here, alcohol ink, which I'm not using in this tutorial, but that's another favorite of mine, and then pan pastels. So those pans that you see on the left, those are soft pastels from Pan Pastel. So you may wonder why I would even take the time to add a layer of the green alcohol marker to cardstock that already has color to it. Why not just select cardstock in that color? So the alcohol marker actually adds some dimension to the green. So it's not solid color. I'm not trying to make it solid. So there's a little bit more variation in the color, and that makes the leaf look more natural. With that layer of green marker added, now I'm going to layer in a little bit of that Pan Pastel. So a good way to make leaves look more natural is to add a complementary color. So I'm using rust red today. I've also used some shades of purple. So like a raspberry kind of pinkish purple works really well too. So green's complementary color is red on the color wheel, and purple would be a split complementary of green. And if you look at leaves in nature, you'll often see, there are little brown spots, a little bit of color. So very rarely are they truly a solid green. So I'm just adding it to the tip. I'm using a cosmetic sponge. So this is the same kind of sponge that I used to use to put my foundation on. And then this lime green, this is bright yellow green is the color. Again, just adding a little bit more to the shades of green. And then I'm also using that to blend in the rust red that we've added. And that rust red, the official color name is red iron oxide. So if you're looking for it, that is the color of Pan Pastel. Now that the color's added, I'm going to use my bone folder again to add a little bit of curl. So here's what that tool looks like. It's traditionally used in bookbinding. That's when I was exposed to it. I was taking a bookbinding class in college. But it is a super handy tool to have on hand if you do a lot of paper crafts. I use it mostly for curling paper, just like I'm doing today. Also helpful for making score lines, so you could run it along the edge of a ruler to create a score line. So I'm adding a little curl and bow direction, so mainly down, but also curling up just a couple of the bare tips. And if you don't have a bone folder, you can also use closed scissor blades. Works exactly the same way. Not quite as easy to hold, but works perfectly fine. So really use what you have on hand. Once you've curled it to the point that you're happy with it, go ahead and set it aside. We'll come back to the leaf in a few minutes. The next step is to create the petals. You'll need to cut one of each of the pieces for each flower. So we're going to add some texture to the petals using an embossing tool. So it's helpful to have a few layers of scrap paper down so that you have a little bit of padding underneath the paper. So it's hard to see, but this tool has just a small ball on the end of it. It comes in various sizes. So when I got this tool, I got a pack of tools and there's a variety of ball sizes on the end. So this is the smallest one in the pack. And I'm just putting some pressure down to add lines to the petals, starting at the base of the petal and running all the way over the edge. And just follow the shape of the flower, so kind of a fan shape on each petal. I'm going to keep going and come back to you once all these petals have the texture. This is another optional step. I'm going to add some additional color to the base of the petals. So I'm adding a darker purple and using pan pastel. So one of the great things about using pan pastel over embossed lines is it doesn't sink all the way into the lines you've added, and it helps those show up even better. So the hard work that you've done to create that texture, this is going to help you show it off a little bit. So I'm using a sponge that came with the set of pan pastels. It's like a cosmetic sponge. It's a little bit denser than that. And I've added fairly thick color at the base of the petal, and then I'm just spreading that out to create that gradient from the base to the tip. I'm using very little color, if any, on the ends of the petal. So I love this paper. It's Venus Violet from Astro Bright. It's a brilliant blue. So I don't want to completely cover that up with the additional color. One of the beautiful things about pan pastels is how well they blend. So you can see as I pull it out, it creates a very subtle effect on the petals. Now I need to layer the petals and glue them together. So start with the layer that has a wide gap between petals, and then fill that gap with the largest of the individual petals. So when I designed this template, I referenced photos of real anemone and used those to look at the petals, how are they arranged, and wanted to create a template that has a very organic feel. So it's not perfectly even, it's not symmetrical, and that's part of what's going to create that more realistic feel to the finished piece. So once you've added that individual petal, add the next layer of 5 petals. You may want to, spin it around a little bit, see which fit that you like best. So I'm aiming to cover all or most of the gaps between the petals with this layer. And then I'm going to add the smallest of the 2 individual petals. And you could also leave this particular petal off of some of your flowers. So you could add it to some, keep it off of others. That creates a little bit more variety as well. And I love this part. So what I've got here is a piece of packing foam. So I just saved it from some sort of something I got. Might have been a set of markers actually. But if you don't have a piece of this lying around, a few layers of craft foam also really work. So this stuff here, you can see I've actually used it before for the same purpose. Just fold it over a few times, create a few layers, about 4 seems to be about right, and you can use that as well. But I do save this packing foam anytime I get it because it works really well for this step. I'm using a paper sculpting tool. You could also use like the end of a blunt marker, so like a Sharpie has kind of a rounded end, that would probably work well too. And just push the ball into the center of the flower, and it's going to make it curl right up. You can also run the ball on the outer edges of the petals, so you really want to push the ball most into the spots where the petal would be cupped. So if you push really hard, it is going to create some little folds in the paper. That may be a look you like. If you don't like that look, just be a little bit more gentle as you're pushing into the paper. As a final touch, use your bone folder or your closed scissor blades. Just curl the very tips of 1 or 2 petals. We are almost done. Just final assembly left to go. So I have my dried center here. Just slide the floral wire stem through the center of the petals and add a few dots of glue to the center of the petals. Slide that up until it's snug against the stamens. Look at that center, isn't that gorgeous? All right, we're going to add the leaf the same way. So add a few dots of glue. We really don't need a lot of glue here. And then push that up until it's snug against the petals. Here are our finished flowers. I think they turned out beautifully. This template does take a little bit of experience crafting, but it's really not a hard flower to make. So I encourage you to give it a try. I think it's a lot of fun to do.